So what I want to do with this video is to really provide a fully comprehensive breakdown of all the inner workings that kind of went into my client Jack having his first meet, going 9 for 9 and hitting all-time PRs across all three lifts. I'm going to go over a lot of the programming principles that we abide by. I'm going to go over how we wrote his taper. I'm going to go over the game plan that we made for meet day and all the attempts that we had planned. And then I'm going to actually go over meet day and kind of look through all of his attempts and really kind of discuss all of the decision-making processes that went into calling each of his numbers and why we kind of made all those choices. So let's get right into it. So starting off with some basic stats, Jack weighed in at the 82.5 kg weight class, or actually weighed in at 81.25 kilos, which is about 179 pounds. This is his first meet together, and we've pretty much been working with each other since May of 2023. So just a little bit longer than, 8, 9 months now, right? We started out with a 138 kilo squat, which is around 305 pounds, a 113 kilo bench press, which is around 250 pounds, and then a 147.5 kilo deadlift, which is around 325 pounds, right? And then going into meet day, we squatted 192.5 kilos, which is 424 pounds, which is about a 120-pound increase. We benched 140 kilos, which is about 308 pounds, which is around a 58-pound increase. And then we deadlifted 205 kilos, which is about 451 pounds, which is a little bit more than a 125-pound increase, right? We went 9 for 9, had 25 for 27 white lights. I'll kind of go over why we got those red lights in the kind of actual meet breakdown, but we still had a perfect day, had a 537.5 kilo total or 1,182 pounds, right? Now what's really impressive is kind of just looking at the best numbers that he took in training before this meet, right? So with squat, we squatted 407 pounds, which is just all-time PR in training, and then we ended up squatting 424 pounds on the platform. He benched 303 pounds or 137.5 kilos, right? And then benched 2.5 more or 5 pounds more on the platform. And then his best deadlift was 187.5 kilos or 429 pounds. And then we actually ended up pulling a little bit, almost 20 kilos more for a good 22-pound PR, right? We ended with 367 dots and got second place in the 82.5 kilos. So what I really want to do now is just go over some of his programming, some of the things that we kind of look at and some of the principles that we abide by with his programming, and then just talk about his taper and all the considerations that went into his taper. If you want a summarized version of some of the things that we noticed with Jack's programming and the ways that we kind of programmed around those problems or just these things that kind of came up and trends that we observed, you can go to my Instagram at AlexTranPL, and there will be a fully in-depth infographic just about, some of the interesting things about Jack's programming, but I'll kind of get into them a little bit more with this video. So starting with squat, Jack's very, very, very sensitive to peak intensity, right? We need to touch very high RPEs for very low reps and touch a high percentage of his estimated 1 rep max on a pretty frequent basis. So what you'll see on his both squat days, this will be his secondary squat day, and then going into Thursday, this will be his primary squat day, right? He starts the block with 2 singles on his secondary squat day, followed by sets of 5. And then we kind of go into Thursday and he has a single and it starts at a relatively high intensity, right? Both days start at around RPE 7. We typically want to go around like RPE 6 to RPE 7 to RPE 8 and then finish the block around RPE 9. But with Jack, he's extremely, extremely sensitive to peak intensities and touching a high percentage of his 1 rep max. So we really want to start the block a little bit earlier than usual, right? So you can see we kind of start the block around RPE 7, and then the next week we go into RPE 7.5, right? This single stays at RP 7, right? And then the next week we'll kind of go up. Well, he was kind of dealing with some knee pain, which I'll kind of go over in a sec. But the kind of overall premise is that, we do need to touch these pretty high intensities on a pretty frequent basis in order to get his squat to move. The other thing that's pretty interesting with his squat is that he needs some sort of stimulus on this Tuesday session between his 2 squat days to almost bridge the gap of lower body stimulus without kind of overstimulating his upper body, right? Or his knees, right? So something that I kind of discussed in the infographic on Instagram is this idea that, Jack has had very significant knee pain, but most of the knee pain is going to come from squat specific stress, right? the way that we have his squat laid out right now is that he squats on Monday, he does split squats on Tuesday, he rests on Wednesday, and then he comes back around and squats on Thursday, right? What we did was we pulled away this Tuesday split squat session just to try and give him a little bit more recovery. So now we'd have 2 full days of lower body recovery going into his primary squat session on Thursday. And that didn't really help at all. It seemed like the knee pain didn't really go away at all. It seemed like, regardless of what we did with any of the accessories, we pulled this back, we pulled back some of the leg press stuff on this Thursday session, right? Nothing really changed the pain, the amount of pain in the knee, right? So what we kind of concluded from that was that the knee pain was more squat specific. It didn't really have to do with lower body intensity or lower body stimulus at all. It really had to do with how much he was actually squatting. So what we did is we adjusted this primary squat day so that he would have less fatigue accumulated from this primary squat day, right? I didn't really want to touch this Monday session just because I think the Monday session did a really, really good job at kind of feeding into this Thursday session, where this Thursday session constantly felt strong and the Monday session constantly felt a little bit weaker. And that was a very predictable trend. And we kind of were able to rely on that every single week of every single block. So I didn't really want to touch this day too much just because I think that it led us into the primary squat day pretty well. I kept the split squats here just because we noticed that when we took out the split squats, right, he was coming into this Thursday session feeling like he didn't really have any pop. He felt like his legs weren't really under him. He didn't really feel like he was powerful or explosive enough in the out of the hole, right? And what that kind of told me was just that he was being a little bit understimulated. So I think that the goblet split squat here on this Tuesday session really helped bridge the gap between the two squat sessions, and kind of gave us the lower body stimulus that we needed without kind of overly taxing the knee, by maybe adding a third squat day here, right? So having a split squat instead of a third squat day really helped us get that stimulus without kind of over aggravating the knee. And then what we did on this Thursday session is instead of having, if you look at prior blocks, right, he would have a single and then he would have a top triple and he would have 2 back down triples at a percentage of that top triple, right? What we did instead was we changed it to ascending sets. So now he would have 2 sets of triples that were extremely, extremely easy, right? And then he'd have 1 final set of this like higher RPE triple. And the reason why we had this is because, again, if we look back into some of the things that we found out about Jack's programming, peak intensity was extremely, extremely important. It really was important that we made sure that we touched very high intensities and very high percentages of this 1 rep max. So we couldn't really just completely abandon this back down work. Like we couldn't just make it extremely, extremely sub max. We had to make it intense enough to a certain extent that it would stimulate the progress that we wanted. So having about 1 set that was high stimulus, and then also another set that was high stimulus, and then having the rest of these 2 sets being extremely, extremely negligible RPE wise was really a great strategy for us. And we actually showed up on meet day with no pain whatsoever, right? Looking at Jack's bench is pretty straightforward. He has a very like raw strength bench. If you were to kind of look at the archetype of how he benches, right? He has a relatively low arch. He has relatively long arms. He's very, very jacked. He's very, very muscular. So bench is very, very straightforward. He only benches 3 times a week. The primary session is pretty straightforward. It's just the top set of 2, and then a top set of 5, and then back off sets of 5, right? On his Wednesday session, he has a primer single, which is going to be this tempo single, which we kind of cap within this like 237 to 248 range. And then he has a top set of 6 and then back down 6s all at a pretty negligible RPE. And then on his primary session, he just has a single and then back down triples at a percentage of his 1 rep max, right? So nothing really too interesting here. I would say that the only thing that is interesting is his bench press is very similar to his squat, where that he does thrive off of those higher RPE exposures, right? So again, we start the block pretty heavy. Usually we go at 6, at 7, at 8, at 9. This block we went at 7, at 8, at 8.5, and then at 10, right? And then also on a secondary a secondary bench day, we saw that he would also have to start pretty heavy here. So we started the block at RP7, and then we kind of just progressed through that, right? So that's kind of bench. And then when it came into deadlift is kind of a little bit more of the problem child for Jack, right? We kind of saw that we wouldn't really be able to stack multiple blocks in a row of, high intensity deadlifting, or else he would kind of feel like he hit a wall, and we almost had to string together multiple blocks in order to go for a PR attempt, right? With squat, we could almost attempt a PR every single block, and he wouldn't feel like he needed a mental reset. He kind of felt like he would be able to go into the next block and still, either beat the number that he just hit or move it even faster. But with deadlift, we didn't really have that, right? He kind of felt like, we needed to kind of build up into it a little bit more. We needed to have a little bit more momentum if we were to go for a single at 10, right? So with deadlift, the goal was really to just try and accumulate as many high velocity and high quality reps in maybe like 85 to 92% of his one rep max rep range, right? So what we really did was we kept the reps pretty low so that we can keep the intensity a little bit higher, right? And we kind of just had him doing a bunch of singles. We had him doing two ascending singles and then back down sets of two, right? And then we had him doing cluster fives and then some RDLs afterwards. Now, the reason for this is just because I want Jack to really practice his setup, right? We ran into some problems with hitching and ramping, and he was kind of dragging the bar up along his thighs. And what we kind of concluded was that if his setup is a little bit compromised and his lower back starts to round and his pelvis starts to kind of tip backwards, in a sense, he starts to shift backwards, right? His weight kind of goes onto his heels. The bar starts to rub up on his thighs, and he starts to almost hitch the bar up, which is illegal in competition. So we really needed to practice his setup, really practice, hinging with a slightly bent knee while also maintaining a slight anterior pelvic tilt with his lower back just a little bit more straight, so that when he broke the ground, it would be a slightly harder off the ground, right? But his center of mass would be able to stay over the bar, and he would be able to pick the bar up with really no ramping or hitching whatsoever. So we really hammer that in with some clustered pause deadlifts, and then just having a pretty low rep stuff so that he'd have a lot of opportunities to practice his setup and just practice, just hinging down towards the bar and doing everything right as we would like. And then just some RDL stuff there just to, work on some hinging patterns for him. So deadlift was pretty straightforward. Now, I think the only interesting thing there is really just how we paced out multiple blocks, right? Jack hit 451 pounds on the platform, and we never touched over 430 pounds in training. And in fact, we didn't touch over 430 pounds for the last almost two blocks or like a block and a half of training, just because I wanted to give him time to build momentum, right? The heaviest weight that we touched in this final block leading up into the meet was actually 413 pounds. So nowhere even close to anything that he had hit prior, right? Or anything that he hit on the meet. 413 pounds actually pretty close to what we wanted his opener to be. So, I think it's pretty interesting that we kept weight so low throughout the final block of training and actually throughout the final few blocks of training, but deadlift still showed up extremely, extremely well. And I think this kind of plays into this topic of building momentum for a lift that you may not be well leveraged for. And I think two, for lifters who may see a lift as like a problem lift, right? Psychologically, I don't think he could handle just pushing multiple high intensity exposures every single block. I don't think that, he could have emptied the tank every single block and came back and re-emptied the tank at the end of the next block. So what we really did was we really tried to stack our chips, right? We really tried to, instead of providing proof of concept at the end of every single block and showing ourselves that we could hit certain numbers, we really wanted to just take something that we knew we could hit and then see if we can move it as fast as we could, and then use the bar velocity or just the general RPE rating as kind of like a sign that we're progressing, right? Rather than explicitly telling us that, hey, like the number on the bar went up, so then we are progressing. We're more looking at it as like, hey, I've never moved this as well as I should have or as I've done before. This means that we're progressing. And that, I think, those mental wins, instead of just emptying the tank and just showing yourself that you can do more, can really build a lot of momentum for lifters who, psychologically are stuck onto one lift and just don't feel like that lift is progressing very, very well. So that's kind of what we did with deadlifts, where we kept intensity very, very, very low. I didn't really let him touch anything, that heavy over like an RP 7.5 to 8 throughout the entire prep. And it really paid off really, really well on meet day. And we showed up and we had a 10 kilo PR, and which was really, really great. So that's kind of what our game plan was on deadlifts. So now I want to go over Jack's taper, right? And if you've kind of kept up with a little bit of modern powerlifting training, you kind of know that this idea of a taper has almost kind of being left in the past, right? A lot of the times coaches now try to establish predictability within a block and then almost train into a meet, since that'll be the most consistent result every single time around. And that's exactly what we did. We kind of knew that the structure that we had with Jack, the weekly structure, and then also the pacing that we had throughout a block would really yield us PRs every single block at the end of the block, right? If there was no meet and we kind of just ran this block out as normal, we pretty predictably know that he'd be able to PR at the end of the block. So there's really no reason for us to kind of taper him too hard. I think that the best thing that we can do is to really just pull back the accessories a little bit, just pull back some of that acute fatigue, some of that muscular fatigue, but then really just keep the squat, bench, and deadlifts training and all of the volume and intensity prescriptions pretty much the same throughout that final week of training and just line up all of his primary sessions on meet day. So that's pretty much exactly what we did. You can see that Jack takes his primary squat and primary squat on Thursday, and then takes his primary bench and primary deadlift on Friday. So the biggest challenge was really just, timing the exposures of the secondary and tertiary sessions so that all of his primary sessions would line up on meet day. And that's almost exactly what we did, right? If he normally squats on Thursday and Monday, we now have him want him to squat on Saturday and Wednesday, right? And if he usually has his split squat day on Tuesday, now we just push it 2 days up onto the Thursday session, right? Same thing if he normally benches on Friday. We want him to bench on Saturday, so we kind of just pushed everything up. So usually benches Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. All we really did was we just pushed the secondary and tertiary day up 1 day. So then now he benches Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And then same thing with deadlift, usually deadlifts on Tuesday. So now we kind of pushed everything up 1 day. So now instead of deadlifting Tuesday and Friday, now he deadlifts Wednesday and Saturday, which is perfect. Now all of his primary sessions landed on the same day. Now we did run into one issue with the squat, right? Where he usually squats on Thursday, right, and Monday, but because of the way that we wanted to time things out, now he would needed to squat on Wednesday and Saturday. But the issue was that the last squat that he took was on Thursday, right? So if we wanted him to squat on Wednesday and Saturday, we'd pretty much go 6 days without squatting because his last squat day was on Thursday. We'd have to wait almost an entire week in order to have another squat session, right? And I think that might have been a little bit too long for Jack. I think just in terms of almost over recovering for squat, just because he's a little bit more sensitive again to higher intensity exposures, right? And I also think that just from a movement pattern perspective, I think that he definitely needed to squat at least once between that the Thursday and the Wednesday, just to kind of make sure that the skill of squatting was sharp, almost kind of like grease the groove with his hips and his knees and all that. So what we did was on this Monday session, I really just had him doing some really light pause beltless squats. This wasn't meant to almost drive anything. It wasn't really meant to be progressive in any matter. This wasn't going to be productive for us. It was really more just so that he could come into this Wednesday session feeling like he had squatted recently, right? This is kind of a feeling that I think a lot of athletes will experience, especially sports that require a little bit more skill. Like if you were a basketball player and you didn't shoot a basketball for 2 months and you came back and you tried to shoot a basketball, things would feel a little bit awkward. It would feel like you would need a little bit of time to almost get your arms under you, to get your legs under you. And that's very, very similar concept here, right? If I gave him an entire week of no squatting, he would come into that next squat session feeling like he almost forgot how to squat, and we'd probably need to spend a little bit more time warming up, but two, I think that would kind of ruin his confidence a little bit going into meet day. If his last session wasn't great, I think coming into meet day he wouldn't be as excited or confident to squat. So I just needed him to kind of get under the bar, stand down, sit down, stand back up a little bit, just a few times, just to kind of practice squatting. And then we'd kind of come into this Wednesday session feeling pretty good and be able to execute as we normally did. Now, to actually get into the taper itself, as I said before, we really didn't change anything at all, right? His normal secondary squat day, if we look at this Monday session, is 2 singles at a relatively high RPE, and then sets of 5 with 77% and 82%, which we kind of pace out by adding 2%. Excuse me, by adding 2% every single week, right? Same thing what we did here. 2 singles at a relatively high RPE, and then sets of 5 at 77% and 80%, right? So pretty much keeping the exact same squat layout, right? And all we really did was have his goblet squats into here, and then go into meet day feeling extremely strong, and we ended up hitting a very big PR there. Bench press was a very similar concept, right? His Monday bench press session is usually a double at RP 8, and then sets of 5 at a percentage of his 1 rep max, and that's exactly what we did. We had a double at 7 to 8, and then sets of 5 at a percentage of his 1 rep max. And then keeping also the flat dumbbell press in there because I think that, pulling that away might be a little bit pulling away too much. I think that if we kind of look at accessories and their transference into the competition movements, the flat dumbbell press definitely has a little bit more transference and carryover into the bench press than something like a tricep extension or like a lateral raise, right? So keeping the flat dumbbell press in there, as I kind of see it as like a kind of compound specific accessories that I think does move the needle on the bench press, specifically the bench press, right? It's not really just kind of like a accessory movement. I think it kind of just you kind of need it there, right, in order to progress the bench. So that's kind of why we kept the flat dumbbell press in there. And then going into his final bench press session of the week, we have his primer single, which is usually capped around 237 to 242, right? 248, right? So pretty much keeping that exact same thing. And then back down sets. Oh, he usually does sixes on this day. I brought it down 1 rep to sets of 5, just in case there was any sort of fatigue in there that would kind of just dissipate out a little bit just by dropping the reps down by just that little. And we came onto meet day and we felt pretty strong. And again, we hit a 5-pound PR. So that was kind of our bench taper. And then when we come into deadlifts, there was really no taper. I think the goal was to really just momentum our way through into the meet. So instead of actually decreasing the weight on his deadlifts for that final week of training, we actually increased the weight, right? And this was kind of for us to almost try and feel like we are progressing into the meet. So on his Tuesday session, it usually does 5 cluster singles at 72%, which is around 306 pounds, right? What we did coming into the last deadlift session is that we actually boosted this up and jumped it to 323 pounds, and he felt confident with this, and he felt like, hey, I could hit this for some pretty easy singles, but I think that it would be beneficial for me to hit something a little bit heavier than I'm used to hitting, but still move it at a very similar velocity, a very similar confidence level, and a very similar RPE, so that when we come into meet day, we feel very, very confident, we feel very, very strong, right? I don't think that the specifics of the deadlift really mattered in this sense. I think that a lot of the programming wasn't necessarily like correlational, where we knew that one variable or adjusting one variable would lead to a positive outcome on another day. It was more of just the fact that I just needed him to deadlift and I needed him to get better at deadlifting, and it wasn't so, I guess, technical in terms of the programming itself. So I don't think the taper had to be as technical as that. I think it more had to do with playing into his psychology and really just making sure that we maximized his confidence and his, self-efficacy going into meet day. So that was kind of what we had for his deadlift taper, pulled away the RDLs, and then just came in and again hit a massive, 10 kilo, 22-pound PR going into meet day. So what I want to do now is kind of just go over the attempt plan for his meet. We kind of wrote out plan A, plan B, plan C for his opener, second attempt, and third attempt. And these are kind of just contingencies based off of, what the numbers he hit in training and what we kind of thought that the quote unquote taper would actually do for him. So starting with plan A, we wanted to open at around 175 kilos or 386 pounds on squat. Now this was subject to change based off 2 things. One, just based off of how his knee felt. If his knee was kind of in a little bit of pain going into warmups, we definitely try and drop this down a little bit more just to kind of see what he had on the day. Now, with that being said, Jack also was able to get his hands on a pair of Inzer knee sleeves going into the meet, and we wore them on his last week of training going into the meet, and he actually felt really, really strong on that. So what we decided to do was that if he felt strong during warmups on meet day, we'd change his opener up about 2.5 to 5 kilos so that we can try and end around that 440 range. Now, this ended up not happening, and I'll kind of discuss why when we go over the videos, but this is kind of just the plan that we kind of had laid out. So we started out with 175 kilos or 386 pounds. We wanted to jump 10 kilos to 185 or 407 pounds, and then jump 7.5 to his third attempt at 192 kilos and 425 pounds, right? Plan B was just to take smaller jumps from that. So if we normally wanted to take 10 kilos and 7.5 kilo jumps, we take 7.5 and then 5, and then plan C would be 5 and 2.5, right? So these were kind of just the plans that we had laid out, and then some of the warm-ups that we had kind of planned here. Bench was a very similar kind of strategy here. So we had his opener set at 130 kilos or 285 pounds, right? We had a second attempt to jump 7.5 kilos to 303 pounds or 137 pounds. And this is a weight that Jack had taken 2 to 3 times in training before, and they all moved relatively easily. So we were pretty confident that 303 pounds would be a pretty safe choice. We wanted to open up just a little bit lighter on bench just to kind of get a feel out for the judges and kind of how the attempts, sorry, and how the press commands would be, and just to kind of be safe because this was Jack's first meet and we didn't really know how he would respond on the platform under kind of all the lights and all the judging and whatnot. So taking a little bit of a bigger jump from opener to a second attempt, that was kind of just the thought process behind there. And then we just planned on taking a 5 kilo jump, hitting 314 pounds or 142 and a half pounds, almost hitting that like milestone of like 3 plates on bench, right? Again, plan B and plan C, which was just to take smaller jumps based off of the plan A. So instead of 7.5 and 5, we take 5, 2.5, and then plan C would just be taking 2.5, 2.5s. Now, deadlifts was a little bit different in terms of picking attempts, just because we didn't really know what was there, but we were very confident that 205 kilos were there. Again, this kind of plays back into this idea of how we built momentum going into the meet and how confident we were when we were making these attempts and how confident we were that we would be able to hit something significantly higher than what we wanted to hit on meet day. So with deadlifts, we kind of worked backwards, right? We kind of said, what is a weight that we could take pretty confidently or something that we think we could probably take now. And the number that we kind of converged on was 205 kilos or 451 pounds, sorry. Right. And then we worked backwards, took the appropriate jumps, which is about 10 kilos and 10 kilos, right? Just because, with deadlifts, we can afford to make a little bit of a bigger jump, just because the objective weight and the percentage of these jumps aren't as high as something like a bench. So we took 10 kilo jumps, working all the way back into 185 kilos, 407 pounds, which again was only 10 pounds less than what he hit as his quote unquote final heavy single of training. So this kind of showed us, will kind of show you how confident we were going into meet day with his deadlift and how confident how much confidence the strategy that we had kind of gave him, right? And we kind of knew that going into meet day that 451 would be there, but we kind of had no proof of concept for that. All we really had to base off of that was just the amount of confidence and the speed in which all the singles in his training moved in the past. So again, plan B, plan C was just smaller jumps based off of plan A, and then we have his little warm-ups here. So now let's look at the meet itself. We opened at 386 pounds. Going into the warm-ups, Jack was telling me how the bar felt a little bit heavy on his back, and he didn't really feel, 100% there. He didn't really feel like his legs were there, and I think that we can really chalk that up to just, a little bit of a more lackadaisical rehydration approach. We weren't really on top of kind of refeeding after he weighed in. So, we decided to stick with the planned opener at 386 pounds or 175 kilos, and let's just see how it moved. Right, he walks out very, very strong, a little bit of a wider stance here. Goes down, he just blows it up. So this move, great. He came off the platform saying, hey, that moved a lot better than a lot of my warm-ups. The bar doesn't feel heavy on my back anymore. I don't know what it was about the bar in the back or whatever, but he felt strong. We took the planned jump, 10 kilos. We jumped to 185 kilos or 407 pounds. And let's see how this moved. It moved just as well, if not even better. Now, the issue here was that this right side judge gave him a red light on depth. So we didn't really want to push it. We kind of knew that, 430 something would be there or like 195 kilos would be there. But we took the plan, jumped 7.5, which kind of just stuck to our plan A. We jumped 7.5 to 192 kilos or 424 pounds. And Jack actually forgot to latch his belt here. So he was essentially taking this attempt beltless, but blows it up, sinks it, 3 white lights, perfect day on squats, ended with a massive PR, 7.5 kilo PR or a 16-pound PR. And, we go into bench with a ton of momentum, extremely happy about how squats went. Now, bench, the plan was again to jump from 285 to 303 to 314 or 130 kilos to 137 to 142 and a half. But bench, I think, is a little bit different, right? Bench, there's a little bit more factors that needs to be taken into consideration. The bench that you use in training, right? The commands and all of that. And Jack did a pretty good job in training to a pretty high standard. He had people calling his press commands for him and his start commands. So he was pretty comfortable with all the commands. But the issue was that he trained on the Rogue pad, which admittedly was thicker, was kind of higher off the ground, was also a little bit more cushiony, so he could sink into it a little bit better. And he also trained with the sticky shelf liner, so his ability to grip onto the bench was also a lot better in training. And as we were in the warm-up room, he was kind of saying how it was almost like a push and a pull, right? He felt like he was stronger because he didn't usually train on carpet, and he was able to bench on carpet, and he felt like his leg drive was really, really strong here. But he also felt like because, he wasn't on the rogue bench, and also because he wasn't able to stick to the bench a little bit, well, as good as he usually was, he felt like he was a little bit weaker. So it was kind of just like a take and a give, and we kind of just said, hey, let's just keep the bench opener the way it is. We won't really change it. We'll kind of just see what there is on the platform. So here's the opener at 286 pounds. Now, admittedly, this moved a little bit slower than what he had moved this in training. In training, this would be almost like a last warm up for him. So, a little bit slower. And, but we saw that the judge was giving us some pretty generous commands on the press command. So, we jumped the normal 7.5, the planned 7.5. Jack came off the platform saying that he felt pretty strong. The bar felt pretty light on his in his hands. He felt like he could take 303, and it wasn't really that big of an issue. So we jumped to 7.5. We jumped to 303 or 137.5 kilos, and this is how it moved. Now, not the fastest, and obviously in this situation, it was a little bit of a grind. And then with taking everything into consideration, we definitely didn't want to jump 5 kilos to the planned 314. So all we did was we jumped 2.5 kilos to 308, which would still be a 5 kilo or 5 pound PR or 2.5 kilo PR. So we jumped to 308. He gets under the bar, right? It's a little bit of a generous press command, and it actually moves pretty well. And he comes off the platform, and you can see the face that I'm making here. I'm like, why did that move, just as well as the 303? Kind of comes off. He's like, I don't know what happened. It just felt pretty easy. It felt pretty good. And, we walk away with a 5 pound PR, a 2.5 kilo PR, and kind of just knowing that 314 probably would have been there if we decided to take it on the day. Now, going into deadlifts, Jack was extremely excited. Usually most people kind of come into deadlifts, especially if, deadlift is kind of considered your problem lift, and they're not as excited. They kind of just feel like, hey, I just want to get this meet over with. But, in the warm-up room, Jack was feeling extremely excited for deadlifts. He was ready to pull, and looking at all of his warm-ups, they look great. They look fast. They look snappy. They didn't really look like he was hitching at all. This is kind of the best I've seen his positioning, all throughout prep. So I knew that we were kind of going to be on deadlifts. So looking at his opener, it moves extremely well. Kind of just picks that thing up off the ground, right? So we jumped to planned 10 kilos, which brings us to 195 kilos or 429 pounds. And again, moves fine, right? A little bit of a sticking point at the top, but from my angle, it looked okay. He didn't really look like he was hitching at all. So I knew he can kind of grind it out as he was able to maintain his lower back positioning and just not really be too aggressive off the ground and just allow the bar to come off slowly and just almost like push into the ground with his legs. So we again took the plan, jumped 10 kilos to 205 kilos or 451 pounds, which would put us at a 10 kilo PR or 22-pound PR. And picks it up, a little bit of a sticking point, but grinds through it really well. From my angle over here, he didn't hitch at all. He got 3 white lights, 9 for 9 white lights on deadlift, and ended with a perfect day, going 9 for 9, a 7.5 kilo PR on squat, a 2.5 kilo PR on bench, and a 10 kilo PR on deadlift. Walking away, really happy with our performance and really excited for more. So that's it for the meet recap. I'm really happy that Jack had the performance that he wanted to, and I'm really thankful that he trusted me with all of his training and to make the right calls and really just put his whole faith into my process and, trusting that I kind of would bring him to where he wanted to be. Let me know if you have any questions. If you're interested in coaching, there is a application link in the bottom, or you can DM me at AlexTranPL on Instagram, and I'll see you guys next time.